Mr. President.
The senator from Maine.
Mr. President, when I first entered this body in the winter of 2000, I was appointed to the Intelligence Committee. And every Tuesday and Thursday, we would meet for several hours talking about very difficult, very complex, and sometimes very scary issues. After sitting through those meetings for several months, it suddenly came to me what our mission in that committee is. And it really comes down to balancing two provisions of the Constitution. The preamble to the Constitution, which establishes the basic premise for why we have a government, why the Constitution was established, uses two important phrases in conjunction with each other. The first is to ensure domestic tranquility, and the second is to provide for the common defense. Now, there are other elements listed, but that is part of the essence of any government, to ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense. In other words, keep us safe. That's what government is all about. But on the other hand, the Bill of Rights, and particularly the Fourth Amendment, makes it clear that there are limitations on government's power in whatever area. The Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their papers, in their houses, and their effects shall not be violated. That no unreasonable searches and seizures. Those two provisions are in tension, and they have been since the founding of the Republic. And the role of the Intelligence Committee and this body, it seems to me, is to constantly recalibrate the balance between those two provisions based upon the threats our country faces and the developments of technology. And that's really what this discussion is about, and it's been brought into sharp focus in the last 2 weeks by the case involving Apple and San Bernardino, and also other cases around the country. The Apple case points up the complexity and the difficulty of these issues. It is not simple. It's easy to say it was a terrorist phone, open it up and get the information. But then when you learn that number one, Apple is not being asked to simply throw a switch or plug in a wire. It's being asked to write new software which would compromise its own software protections built into its iPhones all over the world. So it's being asked to create something, not simply open the doors. Number two, although there's been some discussion about it's just this phone, it's not just this phone. Apple's being asked to create a new piece of software that compromises its operating system in such a way that the phone can be hacked. Once that piece of software is created, there is no telling where it will go. It's referred to in the tech literature as the golden key or the God key. And sure, Apple could keep it, but it might, who knows, a disgruntled employee could let it out. Apple itself could be hacked. It could fall into the hands of our intelligence community. It could then be made public. Once it's out there, you can't undo it. And what I mean by raising these issues is not that I know what the answers are, but that it's very complicated. And what if we create this key, Apple creates the key for the San Bernardino phone, but it ends up in the hands of China or Russia or Iran or a criminal enterprise? Then we've compromised the security of all of our citizens, millions of our citizens, and perhaps of our country itself. The real point here is this is an issue of immense significance and public policy importance that should not be decided by a single court in California or Iowa or New Jersey or anywhere else based upon a 220-year-old law. This is an issue of policy that should be decided here. And indeed, in the district court opinion that was written yesterday in New York, was released yesterday, I stayed up late last night reading it, the heart of that opinion was, this is a job for Congress. This is a policy question. The judge said the people who wrote the All Writs Act in 1789, the Judiciary Act of 1789, many of them were the same people who wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And he said he could not believe that they meant to import to the judiciary the power to make this kind of policy. And that was the fundamental premise of the opinion. I commend that opinion to my colleagues. I've been reading judicial opinions for about 50 years. It's one of the best I've ever read in terms of the research and the footnoting. It's a very, very strong argument, and it makes the case, I think, very straightforwardly that this decision should not stay in the hands of the court. The real issue here is who shall decide this complex and portentous issue. Now, generally, I don't like commission bills. They're often a politician's way of putting the problem off to someone else and in the future, and we'll deal with it and we'll appoint a blue ribbon commission. But I've seen them work. The senator from Maine mentioned the September 11th commission that I think did excellent work and provided the basis for a great deal of good policy. And in Maine, we had a commission years ago on workers' comp, which was a very difficult issue in our state, but the commission helped us to get a political solution that ultimately helped to solve that problem. I have seen commissions work, and I think this is exactly the right answer in this particular situation because the issue is so complicated. And because it involves technology, it involves law, it involves the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and it involves national security. These are important considerations, and we have to understand the ramifications of these issues before taking action. Now, we may want to and need to address the specific issues raised in the current Apple case on an interim basis. We may decide not to do that, but that is an option. We don't necessarily have to wait until the commission acts, because the commission is talking about larger issues. Yes, it's talking about the encryption issue, or would talk about the encryption issue, but it's also dealing with broader issues of digital security. So we may want to make an interim decision while we wait for the work of the commission. But I think the important point is the question before the House is, where should this decision be made? And I would join my colleague by saying this problem, the so-called going dark, the encryption problem and its constraints upon law enforcement, is not new this week. We've been hearing about it in the Intelligence Committee and in the Armed Services Committee and generally in the press for a year or 2 years, and I believe that the law enforcement community or the administration should have come forward with a legislative proposal for us to act upon. And of course, I'm not absolving myself. We could have brought forth our own proposal, but it was their continuing to raise this issue, and I think it was incumbent upon them to say, here's how we think it should be solved. Now, I know if Mr. Comey were here, he would say, well, we hoped we wouldn't have to bother you about this because we were trying to work this out with the technology companies. I understand that. But I wish, frankly, that we had put forth this bill a year ago or 2 years ago, and then we'd be in the position of answering this question today instead of starting down the path of handing this question to a commission that we hope will provide some answers and guidance to us that will help us to make policy. But I'm delighted to be a co-sponsor of this bill. I commend the senator for Virginia for spearheading this effort. And I think it's one that deserves quick attention here and something that we can move so we can get to work on trying to understand all the ramifications of this decision. We don't want to compromise national security, but we also don't want to compromise personal security. And we don't want to create something which could redound against national security if it fell into the hands of some of our adversaries. So I'm delighted to be able to help with this effort. I look forward to working with the sponsor and the other co-sponsors, and hopefully this is something we can move with alacrity so that we can bring this issue back to this Congress sooner rather than later. And we will never answer the questions finally, because by the time we get some answers. There will be new developments in technology and new questions, but we at least need to bring this debate into the 21st century and try to find a solution that will make sense both in terms of national security and personal security for the citizens of this country. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator from Virginia, and I yield the floor.